all coverage of this particular election. But let's now get to our discussion here in studio. Joining me once again, let me introduce my panel. Andrew Franklin, who is a security analyst, Haran Dubi from Surangu, Sauti Yangu, also an observer of this particular Kaukurangu Sauti Yangu, sorry, beg your pardon, and also an observer of this particular election, as well as Richard Tuta, who is a security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us here on Kivumbi 2017. I believe you have been monitoring this election since the polls opened at 6 p.m. Andrew, for you so far, how has it been like? What are some of the things you've picked out?
Well, I think the fact that people were queuing for hours before the polls, once again demonstrates that Kenyans believe that they should come out and vote. But since the polls notionally opened, the glitches in delivering the paperwork, ballots, and the like, the fact that, for example, polls really, they may have opened, but they couldn't actually, people could not vote, for example, in Lamu. Areas we haven't really asked what's going on in places like Mandera, Garissa, Tana River County. Places that are under curfews. When the chairman of the IEBC announces that we'll give them more time, we're going to extend the voting hours, you cannot extend voting hours past the curfew if it begins at 6 p.m. That has been a question that's really not been asked very often. Is areas under curfew, how do you comply with actually counting the votes within 7 hours and relaying that information? And this is over and above or before we found out that nearly 25% of the polling stations are out of network coverage. We also haven't heard about whether the KDF have actually been deployed to protect the telecom masts in Mandera, Garissa, Lamu County.
All right, I'll be getting back to you. Haran, for you, what are some of the concerns or some of the things you've picked out since the process began at 6 a.m.?
Well, I had the privilege to go through several polling stations. I think the process began on well in terms of the commencement of the exercise, though there were a few people who could not find their names in the register, or those that the KIMS kit wouldn't pick from the biometrics. I, for instance, my fingerprints wouldn't be picked there to key in my ID number to get me to vote. But the concern about the ballot, my observations are two. One, there are those marks which have been observed on the presidential ballot. In my station, I noticed one, and the PO quickly removed it and marked it as spoiled. The ballot I received for the women rep, after I had ticked my favorite candidate, I noticed on quickly skimming, I saw that there was another mark elsewhere. So I had to return it and get a fresh ballot. And that mark seemed as if it was from source. It's not like someone marked it here. It's probably from the printer. The other concern I noticed, and I think IBC needs to take this a little bit more seriously, the section where they have written the position for which you are voting is the print is so fine you can hardly read, so it's possible to make mistakes in terms of putting the ballot in the correct box. And the other issue is the color coding of those ballots. The colors look quite close to each other.
Yeah, I remember getting confused
a lot of
with
people,
some myself.
you can imagine if you can get confused.
And especially if you are colorblind.
Yeah, like they say men are colorblind. But I would say that whereas the voting seemed to go smoothly, it seemed to be a little too slow. So I'm seeing a situation where people are going to take much longer into the night, and that is when problems begin, when power goes out, and if there is going to be staffing, any attempt at staffing. But we are, of course, informed that the technology system they are using is likely to guard against that, and I hope it does.
All right, Tuta.
Yeah, one thing, I voted in the morning, but one thing that is coming out clearly, you can see it that like, for instance, what is happening in Embakasi, what happened some while ago around the Nyayo Stadium polling station, what has happened in some parts of Mombasa, Changamwe, that is an indicator that maybe IBC itself had an optimistic view of its own staff, as opposed to have a little bit of pessimist view towards its own staff, because you'll see that now most of the threats towards this process is not emanating from outside. It is emanating from its own staff. So maybe as much as they may have talked about backing up the technology, they failed also to come up with a backing up system towards its own staff, because somebody will fail to understand the reason as to why Embakasi here, which is 10 or 20 kilometers away, cannot start voting as early as 6 whereas far-flung areas, like for instance, Lamu, in some places, they started voting at 6. So is it a case whereby it's normally said that the nearer the church, the farther the salvation? And it is also something also IBC needs to look at, is to try and establish as much as possible the reason as to why their officers are behaving the way they are behaving. Because remember, we are only to 60% of the process. How they are going to treat all these incidences that are coming up amongst their own officers may make the issue to escalate to other bigger things, or it might reduce it. And I like so far what they are doing, even though I'm not still happy in the way they have treated the issue of the returning officers. Because by just telling them to step aside, maybe to them it is a benefit, it is not a cost.
So that for you is a big concern?
We expect more, because look at the cost that it has costed the members of the public in sometimes in these areas where voting have not started, or maybe voting started late. Maybe some people went home. Even if you stand to argue that you are going to increase the number of hours, already the damage has been done.
Andrew Franklin mentioned something very important that I would like you to comment on, Richard, the issue of voting starting late in places like Lamu and Mandera where there are curfews. And we also have IEBC chairperson saying that we will extend ours for these areas. Are we bearing in mind that there are places where there are 6 to 6 curfews?
Remember what I said, from where I sit. Normally, we have a pessimist view of everything. You have to be skeptic. You have to be suspicious. Because one thing that we need to ask ourselves, and which is normally, and I know Akili here knows, it is said in Greek, what is the cui bono of doing all that? What are the intentions of starting late and ending up the polling, closing the polling stations at midnight? Because they had that option. Remember, elections did not come as a surprise. They had 5 years, and they knew all these. And these are the things that I've always been saying, that people will tend to ask, why? Why end up? Some people will say, yes, the reason as to why they want this process to go in tonight is that so that somebody somewhere can take advantage of darkness. And the moment that one happens, then it will be very dangerous for the election.
I wanted to quickly add 2 points regarding the question that you posed to him. The first is regarding the conduct of those presiding officers. If they have committed an offense, and there are very many offenses, including if the intention was to sabotage the electoral process, then the criminal sanction should face them, including those who were offering or issuing some voters with more than one ballot, so that can be dealt with later on. But I think for the immediacy of the issue is that they are removed and election is not interfered with to the end. The second point regarding Franklin's question about the curfew and the voting, I would hope that if there were security concerns, the IEBC in conjunction with the government has made adequate plans for it. But the right to vote is a fundamental constitutional right that cannot be taken away by the existence of a curfew, constitutionally speaking, legally speaking. And therefore, I would say that the chairman of IEBC is right to say that he would extend the period until people have voted for the 12 hours that every Kenyan is entitled to. And therefore, what they needed to do is to ensure that adequate security measures are undertaken. And so far, we haven't had any incident. But of course, like Peter is suggesting, that the darkness always can come with its own consequences. I hope that they are as prepared as they told us. Remember Fred Matiang'i telling Kenyans that they are prepared for us. I don't know. I hope that they are prepared for the evil elements that will want to attack Lamu.
Andrew, for you, looking at how we have conducted ourselves, how the Interior Ministry has conducted itself, how the IEBC has conducted itself, what are some of the things that you fundamentally expected to be put in place but have not during this electoral process?
I don't believe that the IEBC has really coordinated the elections with the security agencies. I don't believe that from day one, back in January, that the IEBC took control of the elections process. In fact, we all know that there are many agencies involved with running elections. The tendency from the end of January onwards has been to accept that there are many other agencies involved and use that as an excuse for failing. The notion that we hope that they're going to have something in place, I would suggest that the security forces, the history in the last couple of years has not really given you that much hope as far as coordinating their own activities, whether it's against terrorists or, for example, as people are still at the polls waiting to vote. And if you've been waiting on a queue for 5 hours, 10 hours, and from what I got from the coverage on the various networks, is people are not being informed about what's going on. The notion, again, mea culpa, I didn't realize that there would be 4 or 5 voting stations in one center, so you would have 3,500.
Some are 17. The specific polling center I went to, there was 17 polling
So there
stations.
you may have, 7,000 people showing up to go through one gate to find different lines. You know, this is a public order question. How will the police maintain the order without overreacting? And this will be going on in front of our cameras rather than just off in Mandera. The regional coordinator for security, Mr. Marwa, he said we're not lifting curfews. He said that just because of the elections. Now that sort of statement was very irresponsible. If the curfews had been lifted Monday evening, Al-Shabaab cannot react to an announcement. They're not Superman. So you lift the curfew so you can actually open your polling stations. You can move around with security.
But what are the risks? At what point do we draw the line between giving Kenyans a secure space to exercise their democratic rights and protecting them?
You're absolutely right about to ask that question. What I said last week on a panel was that the killing of Chris Musonda, the guy who had inspired Kenyans to believe in the technology that we have spent so much money on and invested so much hope in, because we don't trust each other. Killing him was basically designed to derail the elections, to add to the notion that we can't have credible polls today. If we have 4 or 5 counties that cannot report their results, and you have to have 25% of the vote in a particular county out of 24 to become the next president, right? You're just adding increasing amounts of uncertainty to the actual results. Even if you look at these timelines, even in places that are not under curfews, here in Nairobi or elsewhere, you're talking about not being able to complete the voting, the process, until what? Tomorrow morning?
Okay. Andrew, quite a way of looking at things. Haran, you seemed to be nodding your head while he was speaking. What are the things you agree with Andrew?
What he's saying is really true, but it's the kind of questions that I doubt IEBC will have its answers to. In fact, I remember having a conversation yesterday with my colleagues elsewhere, and we were saying one of the things that we need to do as soon as we are through with this election and probably dealt with the petitions that may arise of the various officers that are being contested, is to do a thorough audit with IEBC. Actually, audit the IEBC itself, it is system under the law. Because one of the things we have allowed in this country is for politicians to meddle with the election regulations election processes, including processes that ought to be left to IEBC alone, like procurement. And we are procuring things late. We have the technology is being tested too late. A lot of things are being done in a panic mode, so that even when we were promised that the technology would not fail, we are now seeing where people, they are not finding their names in the register, though they registered. Some are finding that their names have been transferred to different locations. I had an interaction with one young man this morning who said he went to check and was told he's supposed to be voting somewhere in Laikipia, yet he's a Nairobi registered voter. So these are things that I'm saying that systematically the IEBC itself has failed Kenyans, but I hope that this election will be a lesson where we can even have we can have a look at the constitutional provisions in the law to see that we include in the law that in future no amendments to the electoral laws will be effected within a year of the upcoming election.
I would like us to give our final comments. I'll start with you, Richard Tuta. When all is said and done, do you believe that Kenyans will be handed a credible election?
That is, you will be unfair to expect an answer from a pessimist like me, and to expect. Now, but I want to comment something about what you had asked, Andrew.
Please, quickly.
About the issue of the state and individuals' liberty. And I know Wakili here will not agree with me that when the right of an individual conflicts with the right of the state to the security, it is that right of individual that should give way to the right of the state to security. Because within human right, you cannot find a state. But within a state, you can find human right. Thank you.
Closing comments, Harun?
The election process in terms of voting...
Do you expect credible elections?
I hope that we have a credible election, but I am not so sure, because whenever we have had trouble, the trouble does not begin with the actual casting of the ballot, is what happens hereafter. So from this evening is when we will have either a legitimate or an illegitimate election, depending on whether the technology used, the persons operating that technology are committed to giving us a credible election.
Andrew, finally.
I think the longer the confusion spread is in place, the longer that we don't know what's going to happen in areas that are under curfew, we don't know how the process is going to actually be accomplished, because no one's even thought about these issues, that will lead to increased doubts about the credibility of the elections. Credibility is maybe sound ambiguous, and it's a matter of perceptions. But if there are enough missing ballots, enough confusion, enough places that couldn't report, enough results that somehow get lost, what we're doing is just opening up a Pandora's box of confusion. And depending on who may win or think they've won, or who may want to push this election into a runoff, they will leap onto these lapses, these gaps. These lapses and gaps do not have to be there. And in fact, I've found that agencies are not interested in outside advice. That we stay in our little boxes and we don't connect the dots.
Right.
And this is a very serious problem, because if we don't have a credible election, we'll be in court.
All right. Andrew Franklin, security analyst, Harun Dube from Kurangu, South Yangu, also an observer of this particular election, as well as Richard Tuta, security analyst. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here on Kivumbi 2017 as we seek to just understand and put context on this particular election. And of course, they've mentioned some of the loopholes they think are there in this particular election as far as the organization and how the IEBC is conducting itself. But remember, we are also live in almost all the 47 counties in the country. Our reporters in all the vast areas just trying to bring us the news real time as they happen on the whole process. Some have reported incidences, some have reported delays in the whole process beginning, places even as near as Embakasi is just about a few kilometers from here. So we continue to engage with our reporters as they give us updates, minute-by-minute updates on what they are witnessing or what they're covering on the ground. We're done with our first hour of this afternoon session of Kivumbi 2017. Coming up, some of the things that we are monitoring are... Patrick Amimo will be joining us with details on what he's covering here in Nairobi in this particular election. We will also be getting the voices of the people in the diaspora. Remember, a number of about 5 countries are voting. Kenyans in the diaspora are voting in this particular election. So we will be speaking to some from Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, South Africa, and Uganda as they tell us of their experiences in voting in this particular election. But away from this election, Jacob Zuma, the president of South Africa, is facing a no-confidence vote this afternoon. That is one thing we're also keeping a close eye on. So let's take a breather. We'll be back with more here on Kivumbi 2017. Don't go too far.